Hello, my name's Gary Keat and I'm a photographer based in Pembroke. I've been down here about a year and a half. For the past 20 years I've been producing a range of black and white prints which have been sold to various collectors around the world and taken part in various exhibitions. The current one is here in the gallery, Dockside Gallery at Pembroke Dock, hosted by Dorney. My work over the years has developed as a black and white printer from an early start. My photography actually started about 40 years ago when I used to borrow my parents' little Instamatic Kodak and I used to go on trips. And I had a certain amount of success compared to my friends and peers in the group that we used to go out with. And it got me interested in photography, and I got my first proper camera when I was 18. And over the last 20, 30 years, it's something that I've dipped in and out of. But it certainly got a lot more serious during the last 20 years when I began to produce proper black and white prints. I met a photographer who became my mentor for black and white printing about 15 years ago. His name was Terry Cryer, and he was a famous jazz photographer in the 60s and 50s. But most of all, Terry was a master printer. And I started to get to know Terry, and he would come around and appraise some of my black and white prints. Some of them he would say, using very colourful language, "Gary, these are simply awful." But most of the time he was quite impressed, which gave me a little bit of impetus to carry on with the printing, with Terry's help over the last 10 to 12 years. I've taken part in exhibitions, I've sold prints, and black and white printing seems to be, to me, a separate art to photography itself. And indeed, it is a separate art. Having moved down from North Yorkshire just over a year ago, I had a very large darkroom, which sometimes I used to have people come around to print and see what actually goes on in a darkroom. But now we live in a much smaller property, but I've managed to convert our little utility room into a darkroom. I'm down to 2 enlargers. I did have 4, and I'm down to about 25, 30 cameras instead of about 55, because I tend to use film cameras. Obviously, if I do black and white prints, I use film cameras all the time and exclusively for all my work. Some of my oldest cameras are 60 years old as I am. This camera has been used to take some of these photographs. But I tend to buy old film cameras in junk shops or off well-known auction sites, and I tend to experiment with them using different films. I have thought about going digital, or at least trying digital in recent years, but I haven't taken the leap. I call myself a semi-digital photographer because I do get my images scanned and I do put them on websites, and I'm half digital, but I haven't got a digital camera because it just doesn't really hit the spot with myself as a photographer. With darkroom printing, I produce my black and white prints to a fine art standard. Now, the term fine art can have different meanings and different connotations, but for me, to produce a fine art black and white print in the darkroom, you have to follow set procedures. So all these prints go through up to a 9 or 10 stage wet process. It's not just in the tray of one chemical into another, then out and it's done. The paper is heavyweight fibre paper. The heavyweight fibre or Baratta papers contain more silver halide in the actual paper base. It's in the gelatin suspension. So these prints are genuine silver gelatin prints. They can only be produced in a darkroom through a wet process. Sometimes you come across prints for sale called modern silver gelatin prints. Not really. These are genuine wet process prints. Most of my photography is landscape, but I like street photography as well. So I use all my cameras for street photography. I'm currently doing a small body work around Pembroke Dock with people and portraits, particularly using this camera. I do like landscape photography, and I've done a lot in the past, and I use different cameras to get different effects. Sometimes I use a high quality camera, and sometimes I use a a plastic camera with a plastic lens to give you the slightly ethereal effects you see on some of the landscapes. My interest in photography is not just with cameras and developing film and developing prints. I also like the history of photography, the various movements in the 19th century, pictorialism, link ring, photo successionism. I like all the various individual photographers from the mid-19th century up to the mid-20th century. If anybody wants to try film photography, it's quite easy to get into. I know it's rather intimidating when you look at it. You think, oh my God, I can't use one of those old cameras. Where do I get film? How do I get it processed? It actually is quite easy to do these days. There's been a big revival in film photography and a big revival in lots of various films that you can purchase online to try. You can buy various cameras on the internet and through local camera shops. Should you want any advice, then please come to the gallery, contact Donnie, and Donnie will contact me, and I'll be happy to speak to you and meet with you, and we can discuss how you'd like to proceed with your film photography. And hopefully we'll see you here on Friday for the opening exhibition.